The floods hitting Appalachian towns right now are not just the result of heavier rain. The mountains themselves have been physically rewired. Deep inside coal country, more than 2,000 miles of tiny headwater streams are buried alive under hundreds of feet of blasted rock. When storms hit those stripped ridges today, the land acts like a giant gutter instead of a sponge, sending water and mud straight into the valleys. Drive through eastern Kentucky or southern West Virginia after a hard summer rain, and the creeks look calm at first. A 2-lane road follows a creek with a few houses sitting on one side. There is a church, a volunteer fire hall, maybe a gas station, a small store, or a ball field. Then the valley tightens, the road bends, and driveways climb a little. A side hollow opens up and runs back into the trees, looking like the kind of place that has seen hard rain forever and knows how to take it. Water comes down the ditch, the culvert takes it, the creek rises then drops, and mud gets left on the shoulder as life goes on. That older picture still lives in a lot of people's heads, because for a long time it matched what the land did. The creek had its moods, but the pattern felt known. From the windshield, the mountain seems hard, just rock under trees and dirt under rock with gravity doing the rest. It feels like rain hits the mountain and runs straight off. That is the part people get wrong. A lot of that rain does not rush downhill right away. In these Appalachian woods, it gets caught, held, and slowed down by leaves, branches, roots, dark soil, and years of forest buildup underfoot. Right now, in places across eastern Kentucky, West Virginia, Southwest Virginia, and East Tennessee, the forest is acting like a deep, living sponge on steep ground. Up on a ridge above Whitesburg, during a summer storm, rain does not hit bare ground first. It hits the canopy of oak leaves, maple leaves, and tulip poplar crowns. Some of that water sits on leaves and bark, then goes back into the air. Some of it drips down later, slower, in pieces, turning a direct hit into a delayed one. The leaf litter takes over next, with brown leaves, twigs, and mushy rotten wood cushioning the impact and keeping the ground from sealing over fast. Under that sits dark soil full of organic matter, old roots, and tiny spaces between particles where the sponge part gets real. Good forest soil builds over long stretches of time, creating porosity that lets water move downward instead of sideways. The roots work with fungi and microbes in the soil to draw moisture down, actively emptying the storage between storms. The region is full of these living storage systems, continuing to operate every time the rain starts. Forest cover bleeds the water into the channels slower and keeps more water up on the slope. That delay is everything in a narrow valley because a mountain creek does not need a huge basin to turn bad. It only needs a steep slope, hard rain, and too much water arriving at the same time. That natural plumbing system is missing across huge stretches of the region. In parts of coal country, whole ridges were blasted open, and the rock that did not hold coal was shoved into the valleys below. When that happened, the smallest streams in those valleys were entombed beneath debris masses. These were not the big rivers people point to on a map, but the tiny headwater channels up in the folds of the mountains. They spread through the hills like veins, catching water high on the slopes, slowing it down, and sinking it into the ground. Environmental Protection Agency estimates show this method has buried more than 2,000 miles of Appalachian headwater streams. That distance is longer than driving from New York to Denver. Thousands more miles downstream are dealing with the impaired flow too. People hear about reclaimed land and picture the old plumbing coming back, but the land does not go back to the way it worked before. Studies and reporting reveal reclaimed sites often end up with engineered ditches or straight channels that act more like gutters than streams. The leftover rock, called overburden, is pushed into the next valley, creating a compacted fill hundreds of feet deep. A compacted fill does not copy a natural headwater valley. It simply routes water, shedding it instead of slowing it down. Yale's reporting on mountaintop mining put it in plain terms. Once those headwaters are buried, rain no longer soaks in the same way. Flash flood risk goes up, and the runoff reaches lower, channels harder. Once the trees and leaf layer are gone and the soil gets packed down, the slope throws water off itself. Instead of sinking into loose ground, rain skates across the top and goes straight to ditches, ruts, gullies, and drains. Water starts cutting tiny paths in the exposed soil called rills, which grow into gullies that act as fast lanes for stormwater. Then it hits the stream all at once. Down below, that difference shows up as creek stage, current speed, and a muddy surge reaching the town quickly. The runoff gets flashier, bringing a faster rise, a sharper peak, and more force in a shorter amount of time. Two hillsides can sit across from each other in the same valley with the same slope angle and the same storm overhead. The wooded slope catches, holds, and slows the rain, while the disturbed ground sheds fast. Water from one hollow hits the channel, then water from the next hollow joins it. If that surge lines up, the creek rises fast and pushes into yards, roads, basements, and bridges where towns sit. The danger compounds because the forest was doing more than just holding water. It was holding the mountain itself. Drive Route 119 through Logan County and the hills look solid, with trees up the slopes and cut banks above the guardrails. Everything looks like it has always held together. Then a hard rain comes through southern West Virginia, and a whole slice of hillside can let go, sending mud, rock, roots, and water moving at once. The wild part is that the real thing holding those steep slopes together is not the rock, but a hidden root network under the leaves and dirt. Every tree on that slope sends large woody roots deep like cables to act as anchors gripping firmer ground below. Finer roots branch off and fill the gaps, raising what researchers call cohesion, which means the dirt holds to itself better. Soil threaded with roots can take more stress before it tears, absorbing more rain and pressure before gravity wins. Heavy Appalachian rain turns clay and loose dirt into weight, putting that entire system to the test. Once soil gets saturated, it gets weaker, loses grip, and starts acting less like a firm surface. Water adds weight to the slope and raises pressure inside the soil, making it easier for the top layer to slip over the material below it. The hill gets heavier at the exact moment it gets weaker. When the trees are removed from the slope, the living cables turn into dead wood underground. They weaken and rot, forming open spaces where strong root tissue used to be. This is why landslides often show up after logging or mining work, not always during it. A delay happens, a few seasons pass, the roots lose strength, and then a hard rain hits. A slab of hillside breaks loose, and what looked like a normal mountain above a hollow suddenly moves like a conveyor belt. Debris flows act like wet concrete going downhill, pulling trees and carrying boulders into the nearest drainage. The channel gets choked with sediment, forcing the water to rise higher because the stream has less room. This rewiring does not stay trapped in one county. Appalachia is full of small watersheds where one ridge folds into another and one branch drops into the next. The region is a massive funnel. When mined land sits above headwater streams, the damage stacks. Every tributary carries its piece of the flood into the main creek, meaning the mine slope feeds the headwater feeds the branch, and the branch feeds the creek through town. All of these tight catchments eventually feed the Ohio River Basin, a giant drain collecting water from Kentucky, Ohio, Indiana, and Pennsylvania. The Ohio River is not just one river on a map. It is the collector for a giant spread of tributaries taking water from hillsides, hollows, creek valleys, strip mine benches, timber cuts, farm ground, and town streets. At the exact moment the region's plumbing has been stripped of its brakes, the sky is carrying a heavier load. Rising temperatures are loading the atmosphere with more water, and warmer air holds more moisture vapor. Moisture coming up from the Gulf of Mexico gets steered into the region, where the mountains force that air upward. Rising air cools, and cooling air drops concentrated rain that can pound one creek basin while leaving the next ridge over with much less. In 2020 GeoArchitect, the National Weather Service has issued more flood warnings than in any year since 1986. Better detection is part of this record warning year, with radar spotting intense rain faster and computer models picking up smaller, quicker flood setups that older tools missed. The atmosphere is carrying more moisture, the storms are dumping harder rain, and the warning system is spotting trouble earlier. The old flood numbers were built from older records, looking backward to see how often a flood of a certain size happened. But because the background weather has moved, those old statistical estimates are failing. Studies show that what used to be called a 1 in a 100-year flood is now happening several times in a decade across the basin. One storm in one valley can be bad, but several storms across the basin at the same time stack trouble on top of trouble. High water from one branch reaches the main river while another branch is still rising, stacking the pulses on top of each other. The river does not reset between rounds if the next pulse is already on the way. The old idea was that extreme floods were rare enough to sit far apart, leaving a long stretch to recover. But bankful floods and extreme stages are now arriving several years in a row, hitting the system again before it has forgotten the last hit. The region remembers the bridge that went under and the flood line on the cinder block. That old memory worked because the spacing between bad floods was wide enough to make one event feel singular. Now, a short burst of extreme rain does damage out of all proportion to how long the storm lasted, keeping the water building downstream long after the cell passes. Infrastructure makes that mismatch brutal in mountain country because there is so little slack in the system. Towns sit on floodplains and narrow bottoms because that is where flat ground exists. Roads run beside streams. Bridges are tight. Culverts are small, and stormwater systems are old. Disaster philanthropy noted that prior mining-related land disturbance is one reason even moderate storms hit hard, changing how water moves through old culverts and ditches packed with debris. Once a culvert plugs with sticks, rock, and mud, water does not politely wait. It spills into streets, driveways, and buildings, finding the next low route where people live. The water is not just coming from the main creek backing up. It arrives from above and from the sides, meaning a house can get hit from every direction the land can send it. The old idea of what counts as a flood place is breaking apart in real time. Neighborhoods that spent years thinking of flood as somebody else's problem suddenly find mud on the floor and debris in the yard. Side streets, dry terraces, and hollows where rain used to rush through and settle down are now active flood paths. The local memory built over decades about which yard flooded and which bridge to watch first is becoming a weak map. People measure a place by the old store that used to stand there or the creek before the bank slid out, but storms are now dropping more rain than those older records were built to handle. Reforestation shows up in flood plans after mining damage because planting trees is about rebuilding the missing parts of the water system. Strategic replanting puts young trees on and above mined slopes, in headwater catchments where runoff begins, and along stream banks in flood-prone riparian zones. A restored corridor can trap sediment before it fills the channel, helping to buffer storm water before it gets into towns, under roads, and against bridges. The old local map in people's heads gets torn up in a single night. The mountains are still the same mountains, and the towns still sit in the same narrow spaces. But the rain is heavier, the land is less able to absorb it, and the infrastructure is too old or too small for what is hitting it. The buried headwater streams remain trapped beneath the valley fill right now. The artificial drains continue sending storm water downhill fast. The water does not care what an older line on paper said. The real threat is not just the creek at the bottom of the hill. It is the altered ground high above the guardrail where the old plumbing was erased.